So if it's from a practical standpoint, you can kind of think if it's a perfect, then it's going to be in most of the different modes. In other words, if I start on any of these other modes, I will still typically have a perfect. Whereas a major will often be a minor if you go to the minor modes, which we'll see more later. Now we're going to skip the 1-note distance and go to a 2-note distance. So we're generally thinking as though we're on this Ionian node, which in our case is going to be the C, and we're going to go distances from it. Now remember, we apply these same terms for our general distance terms. So you could pick any of the notes and say we're going up a major second to indicate that it's a 2-note distance. You could also say it's going to be a whole step away, which would be great or a better term if there's no context within a scale. But if you go 3 notes up or 4 notes up, the typical distance names do have scale implications, which again is kind of an issue, kind of a problem. We'll talk more about that later. But for right now, we're going to imagine that we're measuring from the Ionian node, which is basically the major scale. That's because the intervals historically were built off of the major scale, right? And then they kind of, just like with the keys on the piano, we started with actually 7 notes, and then they kind of jammed in the other notes to get up to 12, which is the reason we have sharps and flats. Similarly with the intervals are kind of based on the major scale, and then we kind of shoved in what we needed to fit in all of the other intervals, which again leaves us with kind of a mess, right? But that means that we're going to be thinking about the distance from this Ionian first, measuring everything to it. Now, if something is in the major scale, if it's a distance that lands us on a note from the Ionian node, which is in the major scale, then that's going to be named either a major something, a major interval, major scale degree, or it's going to be a perfect. Why perfect? Because again, the perfect was more solid, it was thought to be. So that means that if something is either major or it's perfect, that means it's an interval that is in the major scale, meaning if you start on the 1 of the major scale, you will not land in the ocean if you use that distance term from that point. That's not the case if you start on any other note, but that's going to be the idea of it. That's where they're built from. Now, if it's not major or perfect, usually it'll be a minor, which you would think would indicate that it's going to be in the main minor or Aeolian mode, the minor scale. That's not necessarily the case. That's not how it was really built. It was built by saying, we're going to name all the ones that are in the major key, and everything else we're just going to dump into minor, or if we have to, kind of augmented or diminished, which is going to be the funny 6th one. All right, so if we go down here, we're going to call that a capital M second. The capital M sometimes is replaced with an MAG because sometimes the fonts for capital and lowercase aren't clear as to whether it's capital or lowercase, or when they did it by hand, sometimes that's a little bit more difficult to see. So then I would notice that this does not give you the distance. The distance is 2. So if someone says it's a major second, you're basically thinking that's equivalent to like a whole step from a distance, just a strict distance terminology. And I would add then the distance, particularly if you're on the guitar. It's a 2-note away major second. Now again, you could go an octave up, higher than 2 notes away, but still the flavor is 2 notes away. What would that be? It would be 2 plus 12 notes away major second. The flavor would still be a 2-note away kind of major second flavor. So I would put that into the name so that you can get the idea and concept of the distance. And if you're talking about something other than the first note of the major scale, you want to know it just as distance, because the fact that it's major doesn't give you any more information really, or that it's the second of the scale doesn't really give you any information. It just means it's 2 notes away. Now note that 2 note away is a scale degree. So if I started on the Ionian and I went to the Dorian, it would be the second scale degree, which is how many notes away? 1, 2 notes away from the notes away. That's really wrong measuring over here. It should be 1 step up from the collection of notes in the Ionian node. So I would put in your mind that you want to basically say a 2-note away major second has a distance term that would be more proper of a 2-note away major first modal half step. Or in other words, a 2-note away major first modal half step would be the second scale degree if you make this the 1. But oftentimes if you're down here, you're not going to make it the 1. You just call it a 2-note away, first modal, so modal half step to get you here. All right, now I'm not going to get into this term. We'll get over here later. Again, the major and the minor and the perfects, I don't think are the optimal way to say this because you might not be measuring from the Ionian and you're still calling something a major or a perfect or whatever. So this term would be better served if it told you that the location that you're measuring from or not have it at all. It would be easier just to say it's a 2-note away first modal half step or a 2-note away second scale degree. Would actually be more clear, I believe, than saying it's a major second because it gives you the actual notes or the distance. All right, but in any case, now I'm going to skip the 3-note away because that's not in the thing. I'm going to say it's a 4-note away. So if we start on the Ionian and I go 4 notes up, 1, 2, 3, 4, we land on a continent. We don't land in the ocean. If I went 3 notes up, we'd land in the ocean. All right, so if I go 4 notes up, then what is that? We're gonna say it's a third. Why is it a third? Because if I make this the 1, it's 1, 2, 3. So if I make that the 1, it's 3 up. It shouldn't be 3 up. It shouldn't be the third scale degree. It should be 2 up, 2 modal half steps up from the Ionian. That would make more sense. But no, we're going to count this as the first thing that we're measuring. 1, 2, 3. Call it the third scale degree. So we're going to call that then a major third. This is going to be one of the most important intervals because that's the interval that really determines whether a chord that we'll talk about later and or a mode itself is a major mode or a minor mode. It has a 4-note away distance, which we call a major third. Now again, I would rather call that a 4-note away major third, or I would recommend, and I always say 4-note away major third when I say the major third because I want to reiterate that in my mind because that's the thing that's the most important. And because again, I could call something a major third starting on any note and not have the context of a scale degree. I'm just trying to give a distance and people will still call that a major third distance. And that's going to lead you to think, well, that means that the point you started on must be the 1. But it's not necessarily the 1. They're just talking about it as a distance of 4 notes away, right? So then, so I would rather call it a 4-note away second modal half step. So if someone says it's a 4-note away major third, the third is off by 1 from a normal measurement standpoint. It's a 4-note away second modal half step. So whatever node you are on, typically we're measuring from the Ionian, we're going up from this standpoint, we're going up 2. But notice I could also be on the Lydian and I could go up 2. It would still be a 4-note away second modal half step, which would be the third scale degree. I could be on the mixed Lydian and go up 2. Now the reason I'm choosing Lydian and mixed Lydian, the Y and the X, or on the 4 and the 5, is because if I'm on the F and I go 4 notes away, 1, 2, 3, 4, I land on the A. That's because starting on these 2 other notes are the other major chords, the 1, 4, 5 chords, which are the other major modes, the Ionian, the Lydian, the mixed Lydian. They're all the same, right? So, and they all have that distance that's the same if you start from those points. So if you used 2 notes away and you have this in order, then you can always say, oh yeah, it's a 4-note distance if you go 2 modal half steps up from the Ionian, the Lydian, and the mixed Lydian nodes, right? I don't need to make these the 1 to go to say that it's the same modal distance away, all right? That's the problem. Okay, so then if I go to the next one, 5 notes away, we call that a perfect fourth. So 5 notes away is a perfect fourth. So now once again, we've got the perfect term instead of the major term. Why? I think it's because they actually the perfect fifth down here was thought to be so stable and such a great interval. And then the perfect fourth is the inverse of the perfect fifth. Therefore, if the perfect fifth is great, you have to call the perfect fourth, the inverse of it, great as well. But in any case, that for us means that it's going to be in most of the modes. So a 5-note distance is so solid that it is in most of the modes. So the perfect kind of helps us